Hi everyone, I'm Justin. In this video, we'll be talking about your mic setup for streaming, gaming, recording your voice for content, how to set up that EQ and compressor like a pro, and what's new with some key features in the Wavelink 2.0 update. My previous tutorial was about Wavelink from the perspective of routing and how mixers work in general for beginners. And it was really in-depth and like way too long. So I'm going to assume that you understand all that for the sake of this video, and we're not going to go over that stuff again. And I am going to try really hard to keep this to be a much shorter video. There's been some key updates to Wavelink in the 2.0 version that came out recently, and that has caused me to finally come back around and answer the question that I completely skipped over in the last video, which is how to actually set the EQ and the compressor and that sort of processing to kind of finalize the sound of your mic, your voice. So first, the new features in Wavelink 2.0. Right up at the top, we've got a new Send to Stream Deck button that will instantly create a whole profile for your Wavelink configuration on your Stream Deck with like one touch. One tap routing with Stream Deck so that you can have a button that just like automatically assigns whatever app is in focus to a particular channel. You've got input channel renaming, which means you can change the name of the game channel or the voice chat channel, and that name will be reflected in other apps as you see it in the computer. You can hide unused channels. So if you've got a channel that's not showing in your Wavelink mixer, it's also not going to show up as an option in all the various apps in your computer. There's a software mute button on the microphone, which works the same as the capacitive button on your Wave hardware. But if you're using Wavelink with a Stream Deck Plus and you didn't have Wave hardware, there was no hardware mute button. So now you have a software button right there. There's a new plugin from Elgato, the DeEsser, which kind of completes the set of EQ, compressor, DeEsser. So that's a nice addition. One-click routing. Kind of visual routing. This one's pretty neat, makes it much easier to pick which apps are going to which channel. Just to note that if your apps have internal settings, you'll still want to prefer those. Wavelink will try to show you this yellow warning icon if it thinks that there might be an issue there that you need to address. And as with before, there are still like some games in particular that just fight the routing of Wavelink and just won't assign to anything besides your default output. So just as before, the workaround for that is to set Windows default output to be probably the game channel, whatever channel you want things to come up on by default, and that will skip the routing entirely. And for the most part, I work all around all of those games and apps that don't follow the rules. A big one here, the last two are really huge. Voice Focus is a new AI-based noise suppression, voice isolation technology from AI Acoustics that Elgato has licensed to put into Wavelink. It's really nice. I use a lot of this kind of stuff in my work. Some really high quality noise reduction and voice isolation systems. And I can say that this is probably the best right now as far as what can be done in real time. It's really approaching the quality level that I have in some of my much fancier, much more expensive tools, but those are all too slow to use in real time. They cause sometimes multiple seconds of delay if you were to try to use it like that. So this is a really special thing. Unfortunately, for right now, it only works with Elgato Wave hardware, so your Wave mic or Wave XLR. If you use a Stream Deck Plus with a third-party audio interface, you won't have access to this. Sorry, that's the way it is. That's the choice that Elgato has made. If they change it in the future, then they change it, but no word on that right now. And lastly, sound check. This is a system that's built right into Wavelink that allows you to record your raw microphone, a little clip of it that it's then going to loop back at you through all of your effects chains so you can adjust your EQ and your compressor in real time while hearing your own microphone without having to speak at the same time, because you can't really listen fully with the sound bouncing around inside your skull at the same time. So you got to have it played back to you. This makes it just 1 or 2 clicks and you've got that system, that routing all done for you so that you can adjust correctly and listen correctly while you're making those adjustments. This is huge. This is the feature that made me finally come back and decide that I'm going to answer this question. How do I EQ and compress my microphone? How do I check those settings and set them correctly? Because this is the feature that makes it easy for a non-expert to do that. Those are the features in Wavelength. Those are the new features. And the last ones are the ones that I'm really excited about and the reason that I'm here. As we get ready to set up the microphone, there's a few things to understand first at the beginning. The number one mistake I think I see beginners make is thinking they need to go farther than they really do with the processing. Taking those EQ moves and pushing them farther than they should. You know, a small EQ move is often all that it takes. Even just assuming that you need to change something about your EQ. You might not. Your mic might sound just fine. I mean, if something's way off with your microphone, then yeah, a larger EQ move might be necessary, but you want to do that because it's needed, because you hear that it's needed, not because you think you should and you just reach for it right away. So, and that goes all the way through, you know, once we're done, we should bypass these effects and make sure, does that really sound better? Do I actually like the result better? And then at the very end, and I'll remind you of this, find some voiceover that you like the sound of and compare. Once you got yours set up and it's sounding pretty good, compare to something else that you know you like. Is yours a lot darker or a lot brighter? Maybe you need to come back in and make some broad changes to your EQ to kind of make it sound a little bit more to your liking. And then the other thing that I want to bring up right at the beginning is about presets. There's a lot of presets in the Elgato marketplace, and that can be a good starting point for somebody, but it can be deceptive because any preset that was created, like even if it was created for exactly your mic, like a Wave 3 or a Wave DX, a different voice was used was being listened to when they made that preset, and they were in a different room. So your situation isn't going to sound exactly the same. So I would say if you're using presets, use them as a jumping off point, or maybe just to get an idea what you're looking for in the first place, and then kind of take it off and customize it to your own voice in your own room. Now, with that said, what's the first thing you do when you're setting up your microphone? The first thing is actually positioning it correctly and setting your gain correctly. So before we jump over to Wavelength, since I have the camera in my face right now, I'm going to talk about mic position. Now, this is a dynamic mic, and I'm also using a dynamic mic on my Wavelength setup on the other computer. So this one's made to be used pretty close. And if you can see, like, the camera angle is kind of stretching the aspect a little bit, but I'm about 1 fist away from this microphone. With a dynamic, you can be quite close. I could probably be closer, but I like to be about 1 fist or so away. It means that I can move a little bit and it's not changing my sound that much. The closer you are, the bigger a change you get from slight movements. If you're using a condenser mic, those are usually designed to be used a little further away, which makes them a little more forgiving in that sense too. Like, you don't have to stay right on top of it to make the sound stay the same. But the farther you are from your mic, the more your mic is going to hear the sounds around you, because your own voice is relatively quieter compared to the sounds in your room. Now, I'm in my recording studio right now. It's very clean in here and I don't have an issue. I could stand across the room and you'd still be able to understand what I'm saying. But that's probably not the case in your gaming computer room or wherever you're streaming from. Even if you have some acoustic treatment up, it's probably not to this degree, let's be honest. And when I go down to my game computer, my setup with Wavelength, you'll hear that my room is not treated down there. It is not a recording studio, and I don't worry about that. I'm playing games and streaming and recording when I'm down there. It's not that big a deal, and I'll show you why and how good that voice focus does to kind of clean that up. But this position is good. This distance is decent for this microphone, maybe a little further if it's a condenser, but if it doesn't bother you, you could be up close to a condenser too. The biggest thing is plosives. Usually people have trouble with that. And you can have a pop screen in front of your microphone if you want, but I'll tell you what, the best way to clean up plosives is to just make them miss your mic in the first place. So you'll see that I don't have this thing directly in front of my face, right? It's off to the side. It's kind of a 45-degree angle pointed right at my mouth, right? It's angled toward my face. Now I can see past it. I can see my whole monitor. I can see all this stuff. That's exactly the same way that I have it set up down in the other room. I have the mic coming in a little bit off to the side. And this works. All my plosives are going to go this way, right past the mic. They're not going to hit, especially if you're using condenser mics. Those tend to be really sensitive. And, not all mics are created equal. Some of them are going to be more responsive to your plosives. And so just setting it up like this, a little bit off to the side, is going to give you the right angle. So I think that's good for now. At this point, we're going to switch over to Wavelink. Okay, here I am on my game computer where I have Wavelink set up. This is not a recording studio. I don't have a lot of acoustic treatment in here. It's just a room. It's in the basement of my house. Behind a door behind me, the furnace is running right now, which I'm sure you can hear. And this is a representative setup of how most people are going to be. I assume that by the time you're getting to where you actually want to process your mic, you're at least thinking about making your room sound okay. Like, my room isn't crazy. I'm not in a bathroom or something like that. There's like a couch in here and stuff. It's not super echoey, but I'm sure you can hear something. I have a Wave XLR here. I've got an RE20 plugged into it, but that doesn't matter that much. Like, whatever your microphone is, we're going to be processing and mixing the sound to whatever that is. So you don't need to know exactly what mine is. Your room, your voice, your mic are all going to be a little different, and we're going to be using our ears to figure out what the best sound is for your situation. The point of processing your microphone is so that bothersome frequencies and level changes can be controlled and corrected so that your listeners, your viewers, have an easier time hearing you and understanding you. And imagine that in many cases, your mic is probably heard over game sound, whether that's, in voice chat with teammates or on a stream or whatever. If you're making videos where your microphone is not combined with game sound or music, then, maybe that's a little bit of a different case. But I'm going to be thinking of it so that what we end up with is something that's going to sound good combined with other things. One of the things that I'm thinking about is I don't like a super hyped sound for that with super deep bass and really crisp, airy highs. Too much of those frequencies can sound, I just said too much of those. When you're building your sound to contain a lot of really deep bass and super high highs, it might sound pretty cool and exciting by itself, but relying on tons of those frequencies in your voice sound means that, for one thing, it's not going to cut through a mix with other things like game sound and music quite as well, because you're taking up a lot of space in that mix with just your voice. So your voice is going to have to be louder comparatively to kind of cut through. And there's going to be a bigger difference from small or large playback speakers. Like if somebody's playing your content off their phone speaker, it's going to sound a lot more different compared to like larger speaker systems than if you didn't include a ton of those deep bass and super, super high, airy high frequencies. So focusing on the mid-range, which is where the human voice is mostly to begin with anyway, is a great idea. So, we already talked about microphone placement, or I'm going to assume that your microphone is placed correctly. The first thing I'm going to do is get my gain set up. Now, I have done this for my microphone. You can see that my input level is showing a pretty good level right here. I'm in the second half of the bar. I'm not really near clipping or anything like that. I'm using a dynamic mic, so my gain is pretty high in here. Set this so that when you're speaking normally like I am, like mine's at 55 dB, don't follow that number. That's specific to your voice and your microphone and how close you are to it. In my case, 55 is the correct number. but you can sort of see from the meter like what kind of range I'm in. This is a good place to be. Next, the first thing we'll check is the new voice focus feature, which is really excellent in the work that I do processing dialogue for all kinds of productions. I have some very fancy noise reduction and audio correction tools, and voice focus sounds really it's getting up there into the really some of the sounding like some of the really fancy tools that I have for that, which are much too slow to use in real time. So voice focus, as far as I'm concerned, is the best right now as far as what you can do in real time. And at the point where you want something that sounds better than this, you really do have to go processing after the fact. So for setting this up, we're going to incorporate the sound check feature right away as well. So right now we're just listening to the mic totally naked. I'm going to record a test pass. This is the sound check feature right here. And what that does, as I said, is allow you to record a bit of your raw microphone and then play it back to yourself so you can hear the results. Now, when I do this, when I'm playing it back, you won't be able to hear me commentating that on the recording. So right now I'm just going to do a little test and I'm going to bang on my keyboard, because really, like, one of the things that I want to know from voice focus is, like, I know it's going to easily take care of the furnace going on in the background or your PC fans and stuff like that. For me, I have joysticks here, they're clicking. I have my keyboard taps. So I'm going to go ahead and record a little test pass, and I'm going to include some keyboard taps in that. So here now I'm recording and I am typing on the keyboard pretty loudly so we can test it. Okay, and then I'll play that back. So here now I'm recording and I am typing on the keyboard pretty loud. Okay, great. So let's turn on voice focus, and I'm going to kind of play with this faded in the strength of the effect to try to eliminate that keyboard sound loudly so we can test it. So here now I'm recording and I am typing on the keyboard pretty loudly so we can test it. So here now I'm recording and I am typing on the keyboard pretty loudly so we can test it. So here now, so that's pretty good. I mean, I find that this, you can pretty much max it out. It doesn't do a lot of damage to the voice. It's, as I said, it's some really, really high quality noise suppression, and it almost completely eliminates that very, very loud keyboard sound from my voice. So now we've got voice focus on. If you find you don't like quite as much, you can back some of this off, and you'll hear that some of the noise and the room echo is slowly going to come back into my voice the lower I make that. It's your preference, but for my money, I think turning it all the way up is perfectly fine. It really doesn't change, cause artifacts in my voice to any degree that I would be worried about. Okay, so we've set up voice focus. We like the way that sounds. I recommend doing that first because it does some of the spectral shaping as well as noise reduction. So it's kind of correcting for some things. It's going to be making up for a little bit of maybe distance changes from your mic as you move around, and cleaning up reverb in your room, things like that. That's always what you should start with first, or whatever noise reduction you end up using, should go first in the chain, that first place. After that, I'm going to have you add the compressor next. So sticking with all the Elgato effects, because they're free in the marketplace, you can use third-party effects with Wavelink, but we'll stick with the stuff that is from the first party here, and because I think it's made in a good way that's easy for beginners to understand, and it's free. So let's throw that compressor on to begin with, and what you're going to be greeted with is this. This compressor plugin was made before the sound check feature was added. So this actually had a little bit of a sound check like feature to begin with, where you can go through this little process and it will let you speak into it and kind of show you what it's doing, and set you up with a little bit of like suggested starter settings. So they just want you to click proceed here and you'll start speaking into the mic. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Vocal compression is the secret to sounding pro. Let's do this. Oh, they didn't even give me enough time. That's okay. Then they tell you to adjust the slider so the tips of the peaks are affected. So they really just mean a little bit like this. But really what we want to do is, now that we have the sound check feature, we want to be able to hear what's going on in a more continual way. So we can, if you like, just kind of skip that beginning part. And so to make that work, what I'm going to do is return to my sound check feature and record a phrase into this. Let's get rid of the other one that we were checking the voice focus with, and just get something that's going to show off enough of what's going on. So a good example, a good test audio phrase will show off a range from soft speaking sections as well as very loud speaking with consonant S's and T's. There we go. I got something in there. Okay, so once again, when I push play on this, you won't be able to hear my commentary, so I'll have to keep coming back here to kind of pause it as I work on it, but I'll try to show you what I'm doing. What I'm going to be doing with the compressor back in front is paying attention to what it's compressing and listening for the differences. So let's begin that now. I'll play back this sample. A good test audio phrase will show off a range from soft speaking sections as well as very loud speaking with consonant S's and T's. A good test audio phrase will show off a range from soft speaking sections as well as very loud speaking with consonant S's and T's. So pausing it right here just to show you what I'm doing. As I was adjusting this threshold, I'm kind of wanting it to be compressing my voice when I'm loud, obviously, and maybe just a little bit if I talk quietly. I'm kind of setting this threshold so it's just barely touching those. It kind of depends how much of that compressor I want to hear. And it depends how much you move around. You know, if I back way away from the microphone and speak kind of quietly, if that's something I tend to do, part of the compressor's job is to even those things out. But pay attention to that and show, in your example, in the test phrase that you record into the machine there, what you're going to do. So we'll play that again. A good test audio phrase will show off a range from soft speaking sections as well as very loud speaking with consonant S's and T's. A good test audio phrase will show off a range from soft speaking sections as well as very loud speaking with consonant. Okay, so right there, I adjusted the threshold so that for the very soft section of the test audio that I made, I was just barely touching the audio at all. Whereas when it gets loud, there's quite a bit more compression going on there, and that's okay. The other thing this compressor has is you can dig into the advanced settings. For the most part, I would suggest leaving these alone. This is perfectly fine. The ratio, the attack and release. You don't really need to know what this stuff is, but for those who do, it is available in here to adjust if you need to. Auto makeup is probably the only thing that most people might need to touch. I am going to leave it on auto for most of what I'm doing here. If you are using Wavelink without an Elgato microphone device, so in other words, that would mean that you don't have access to clip guard, then setting your gain is you have to be a little more careful about it because you don't have clip guard there preventing you from distorting when you get very loud. So I'm able to be kind of cavalier about how loud I set my microphone gain. If you don't have access to that because you're using a third-party interface with Wavelink, then you may have a lower gain setting to begin with, in which case your microphone may be kind of a little quiet for your taste on the output, and you might turn off auto makeup. And you'll notice that I get kind of quieter when I do that because now it's no longer making up for the gain reduction that it's doing. And then you can kind of drag this back up to bring it into the right place and manually compensate. Essentially, you would manually overcompensate if your starting sound was lower than what you want it to be. In my case, I'm going to be perfectly happy with the auto makeup. So really what the makeup gain is doing is just replacing the gain reduction that it does on the loud parts of my voice. Next step is the EQ. Now, I say the EQ is the next step, but actually I want the EQ to be before the compressor. And the reason for that, so this is my processing order. I want the EQ to be adjusting my sound to fix anything that's kind of not sounding great to me in my raw audio. And I want that to happen before the compressor, because that'll allow the compressor to work more effectively on the sound that I want it to be listening to, when it's deciding whether or not my voice is too loud and to push it down. And we can make this one bigger. I can resize the interface here. As I boost or cut frequencies, it'll change the overall loudness of my voice. And because I have the compressor afterwards cleaning that up, essentially like evening out those volume changes, I have a better idea of what my EQ is actually doing to my sound, because I'm not being fooled by the changes in loudness that come along with that. So here's the Elgato equalizer. They have these clever little words at the bottom sort of describing what the different areas of the frequency spectrum kind of represent. I noticed that some of these have a kind of negative connotation, while others sound kind of positive, like air and presence have, that seems sort of like a good thing, right? Oh, I should boost air and presence because those are good words. Nasal, oh, that sounds kind of nasally. Maybe I should cut that. Boxy, well, that doesn't sound good. I should cut there. Here we have boom and warmth. They're using both words. That is things that I could use to describe this area of the frequency spectrum. If I didn't like what I was hearing in that area of the frequency spectrum, I would say boom, right? I got to get rid of that boom. Whereas if I needed more in that frequency spectrum, I could say, oh, I need more warmth there, right? So I want to caution you to not pay too close attention to what these words say, because I could have picked other words. Presence, you could also say harsh. Most of the harsh sounds in any speaking voice is going to be kind of in that segment. But harsh and presence, a lot of this frequency band that they're calling nasal could be thought of as like intelligibility, making sure you can hear my consonants and understand my words. If I cut all of my nasal frequencies, then that stuff all starts to go away. Boxy, if I cut a ton out of the boxy frequencies, yeah, I'll sound less boxy, but I'll probably start to sound hollow and thin. So I can use positive or negative words for any of those. So hopefully this helps, but I do think that they're on the right track by describing these areas of the frequency spectrum to kind of get you started, but don't always necessarily think of them that way. Okay, what I'm going to do here is we can grab these bands and move them around. When you've got one selected and it's got a ring around the scroll wheel, that's not a good example. Let's select this one and do a boost. The scroll wheel will change the width of that EQ filter. So we'll just kind of reset everything to default here. What I'm listening for is stuff that's going to poke out at me and kind of, I feel like maybe I want to adjust. The way I'm going to do that is by hearing the frequency I want to get rid of first, and I will boost and kind of sweep it back and forth. What this does is it accentuates the frequency I'm boosting, which lets me sort of hear, am I zeroing in on the right spot? If I crank anything all the way up like this, it's going to sound bad. So, we really just kind of want to listen when it's not boosted and decide what I'm hearing that I want to cut a little bit out of, and kind of sweep around and find it. And then I will turn that boost into a dip. And I'm not going to dip it all the way out either, because that's going to like destroy my sound in a different way. I'll probably just end up with a very small change, but I'll be doing this boost and sweep to find where I want that small change to be. It just makes it a little easier to hear. And we'll do these with the low cut as well, because I find for most microphones, there's a little bit of low cut that you can do as well. So we're going to go back to playing back our test audio, and now we're going through the EQ and the compressor at the same time. So here we go. S's and T's. A good test audio phrase will show off a range from soft speaking sections as well as very loud speaking with consonant S's and T's. A good test audio phrase will show off a range from soft speaking sections as well as very loud speaking. Okay, so I'll pause here. The thing I did first was actually bring up the low cut filter a little bit. Where I ended up was, it's 69 hertz. Look at that. I'm really not getting rid of any of my voice, but I am reducing a little bit of low rumble. I kind of listened for that spot where it started to affect the sound of my voice and then just pulled it back a little bit, right? So I didn't actually want to change my voice with this sub filter, but I wanted to, get rid of anything that might happen that I don't want. So that's where I ended up. There's already a low cut filter on the mic itself. This is below the mic. I mean, you could probably see on the display, there's a little bbit of stuff down there. I mean, this is very quiet little rumble, but we're just kind of cleaning that up a little bit. I was right around that range. And now I'm going to start poking around in the other bits of the frequency response. I know for me, there's usually some kind of like low mid-rangey things that sound like build up in my voice, at least with this microphone. And there tends to be a little bit something in the maybe nasally kind of range. And some of my sibilance does get pretty sharp on this microphone. I might adjust that a little bit with the EQ, and then we might see if the DeEsser is a kind of a better solution by the end. But those are the things that I know I'm going to be listening for from knowing my own voice on this microphone. I don't have a particularly deep voice, so yours will be totally different, but this is just kind of showing off the process. So we'll go back to playing this back, and I'll listen and add some bands here to fix the other things that I hear. With consonant S's and T's. A good test audio phrase will show off a range from soft speaking sections as well as very loud speaking with consonant S's and T's. A good test audio phrase. It occurs to me, because I'm adjusting this EQ with a compressor after it, the compressor, as I said, is making up for the volume changes that I'm doing. That allows me to kind of hear, I'm kind of repeating myself here, but it allows me to hear what the EQ is doing without the volume change because it's being corrected for. That makes a lot of these EQ moves sound a lot more subtle than they would otherwise. That's intentional. We really do want that to happen because when the compressor is evening everything out, that's the effect. That's the final effect. So we really do want to kind of listen to what we're doing with the EQ otherwise. So I was boosting up some of these mid-range frequencies, trying to find the thing that I'm looking for to get rid of. And look, I even left it here, and you can see on the display that there's kind of a big peak in my voice. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's a frequency exactly right there that I want to cut. It might, but we want to make sure we're not mixing just with our eyes, we're using our ears instead, because that probably also means that that's a major part of what makes me sound like me. So we want to be careful and not just like, if I see a peak, I don't want to just automatically get rid of every peak I see until I'm totally flat. That's not really the goal of equalization. So, all right, I'll resume here. Will show off a range from soft speaking sections as well as very loud speaking with consonant S's and T's. A good test audio phrase will show off a range from soft speaking sections as well as very loud speaking with consonant S's and T's. A good test audio phrase will show off a range from soft speaking sections as well as very loud speaking with consonant S's and T's. A good test audio phrase will show off a range from soft speaking sections as well as very loud speaking with consonant S's and T's. A good test audio phrase will show off a range from soft speaking sections as well as very loud speaking with consonant S's and T's. A good test audio phrase. So what I found is, as usual, there's a little bit of sort of low mid range frequency that I put a little dip in, and there's a bit of a nasally kind of frequency up here that, once again, I'm using their word there, the nasal frequency, where I did want a little bit of a cut. And after that, I'm sounding pretty okay to my ears. It's working for me. So now that I've touched this EQ a little bit and you kind of see what's going on here, one thing you might notice is these aren't really deep cuts. I'm not doing big swings. I'm not boosting a ton of highs or anything like that. Like, there's plenty of highs in my microphone already. If I add a band here, and we'll change it to a high shelf. If I add a band and start boosting a bunch of highs, like, that doesn't sound better to me. It sounds more hyped. Let's do the presence and air frequencies as they describe them. It sounds very hyped, but it doesn't sound natural. It doesn't sound like good or correct. I want you to resist the urge to create a big smile curve, to put a big high shelf in here like this, and let's put a low shelf, and let's boost up those. And oh man, we can get a lot of hype going on here. We can get that big, thick radio voice, that doesn't sound natural. That's not going to cut through your game audio as well. Okay, so the last thing then is let's go ahead and add that brand new Elgato DeEsser. So here's another one where it's going to do a little bit of auto mode for you. I kind of like this. So basically we're going to click this button and do just what they say, read the little thing to give it enough S sounds to kind of interpret. And note that because we have added this after the EQ and the compressor is already set up, it is listening to the result of our EQ and our compressor, which tells it exactly what it needs to know because that's what we want it to be working on. So I'm going to go ahead and click now. DeEsser, smooth the sharp S sounds. Okay, so here's what it got, and it picked some bands. There's sort of an overall intensity that you can adjust. So in order to hear what it's doing, once again, I'm going to play back my test audio here and adjust this intensity level, but it picked a spot for me to start with. We'll show off a range from soft speaking sections as well as very loud speaking with consonant S's and T's. A good test audio phrase will show off a range from soft speaking sections as well as very loud speaking with consonant S's and T's. Okay, so right here, just to show off what happens if you just crank this thing up, it's rounding off all of, this is what it's sort of detecting as the sharp and harsh sounds in my microphone. If I crank this to 100%, it's rounded them all off, and my mic doesn't sound very good. That's sort of like over equalizing, right? It's like over de-essing and smoothing out every peak. You're getting rid of the things that make my voice. You're getting rid of a lot of my consonant sounds, making my words harder to understand. So if we pull that back, I can't remember what they had, 40 something percent. And that sounds a lot better. We're in the zone now. It's fixing some of those little things. So from here, we can push the customize button. And then live, you can kind of see, it's not showing you any numbers here. It's saying this is sort of the range where the ch sound is. And here's the range where the S sibilance is, the higher frequency. And once again, we have sort of timing and ratio controls, which I, again, recommend that you don't bother with touching unless you really know what you're doing. They're starting in a perfectly reasonable spot. And then you can see on the display how much of my voice it's adjusting. In fact, I can make this bigger so we can kind of see it a little more easily on the video. I think this is a really good and easy to use DeEsser. I think for the most part, people aren't going to need to adjust it once they this is basically how it's set for me, and it's perfectly fine. So we can kind of leave it alone. Now, when it's all over, we can play our test audio again. So right now, you can, as a listener, you can hear what it's doing because I'm recording through it. But for me as a user, I still need to go back here and play back this test recording in order to make adjustments. So from here, I could decide that now that my DeEsser is on, I want to boost up a little bit of highs, or maybe I want to go back and change some of this EQ. They're all feeding into each other and working together, so we can continue to kind of make adjustments. I can go back to my compressor. Let's call open that again. And maybe now that my EQ is adjusted, maybe I can adjust my compressor a little more. I'll go back and play my test audio because that had the loud and soft volumes in it. A good test audio phrase will show off a range from soft speaking sections as well as very loud speaking with consonant S's and T's. A good test, that still sounds perfectly fine to me. And if you watched on the display, it's still just barely touching when I got quite quiet. And then doing quite a bit of reduction when I was very loud, which is definitely what you want. And I still got it right in the right zone. If we go back to the DeEsser, yeah, it's I don't know, it's doing a great job. What else can I say? So back to the EQ. Let's go ahead and let's add a band here. Let's make it a high shelf. Let's experiment with boosting up some of that presence. I'll soften that a little bit. So maybe now I decide that now that I have the DeEsser, I can do a little bit of a high boost and maybe give myself some extra presence. Let's play our test audio. Audio phrase will show off a range from soft speaking sections as well as very loud speaking with consonant S's and T's. A good test audio phrase will show off a range from soft speaking sections as well as very loud speaking with consonant S's and T's. A good test audio phrase will show off a... So, you could get away with this. I kind of felt like I wanted to, as I pushed this up, I'm kind of adjusting this band to bring that original problem frequency back down. And I'm kind of doing a nice wide shelf boost around that frequency to bring up the highs. To my ear, this isn't necessary. You double click these nodes to just bypass them. I checked it on and off. I don't think this is really necessary for this microphone. But it might be for yours. If you have a different microphone, different voice, you may want to bring back some of that highs, and that's a perfectly okay thing to want to do. Just, check it, turn it on, turn it off, and listen to it both ways, pushing into that compressor, cleaning up the volume changes that this boost will cause. And then you'll have a real world idea of what does that actually sound like when I turn it on. In my case, I don't think I need it, but all this sounds quite good to me. So that's my process. So the voice focus is doing a ton of the work, EQ, correcting just a little bit of stuff that kind of pokes out, making it sound a little more even. You can get rid of that extra band that I was playing with and didn't need. Then that feeds into the compressor, even though we set that up first. It's second in the chain, and that's balancing out the dynamics. So if I move away from my microphone, it's going to... and then move back in closer, the compressor is going to kind of even out those volumes and keep everything nice and even for the listeners. And finally, the DeEsser, which cleans up a lot of that harshness in a pretty pleasing and I think transparent way. I think they've done a really good job with this, just kind of setting you with a starting point that anybody's going to be able to use, and you don't have to be an expert. But if you are an expert, you can come and dial this in, narrow that right down, or widen it out just like you can with the EQ. And you'll end up with a pretty natural chain. And because we were able to use the sound check feature here to play back our voice, you can do it on your own microphone without having to record a test stream and play it back, or do any finagling like recording a file and playing it back into a different channel and wavelength, all that stuff that we used to have to do. Well, I hope you found this helpful. I hope this helps you get your microphone sounding really good, sounding the way you want it to sound, and gives you, that confidence to be able to set it yourself and not necessarily rely on a preset all the time, which hasn't been created exactly for your microphone. So I think you'll end up in a better place if you follow these steps. The last step really in all of this is, like I said, turn off the processing. Once you got it sounding the way you think sounds good, turn it off. Just listen. Does it actually sound better? Make a few more test phrases and try looping those through and compare on and off with the effects. And, it takes repetition and practice to get good at this process. So come back, redo this next week. Do it today, redo it the next week, redo it again the week after that. Go listen to some other voiceovers, as I mentioned earlier, that you like the sound of, some other content creators with a good mic sound, and then compare to yours, just head to head. Like, what's better about this person's sound compared to mine? And that should get you pointed in the right direction. Do that comparison and then redo this process. And don't be afraid to work on it and make tweaks. And if you have more questions, feel free to come find me, JN Tracks, in the Elgato community Discord. I spend a lot of time in the community tech help section, along with tons of other super helpful people on all topics: audio, cameras, capture cards, lights, the whole thing. It's a great place to hang out. And that's it. Have fun.